Hey all, Gam here, your host for today. The game we're going to be looking at this time is one that's really interesting to me personally. So interesting, in fact, that before we get into it, I have to give you some background on a certain man first. The man in question being this guy. His name's Dr. Osamu Tezuka, and if you've ever gotten into any sort of Japanese animation, you ultimately have this man to thank. In his life, he was a man of many talents and interests, ranging from medicine to theater. But what he's most well known for are his contributions to the worlds of manga and anime. He's been known by a number of honorific titles over the years in reference to his relation to the mediums, such as the God of Manga, which is primarily because he almost single-handedly revitalized the art form in a post-World War II Japan. He also, through his diligent work to bring his creations to television, essentially invented anime in a form that's evolved to what we know today, taking many influences along the way from Walt Disney himself. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, it's because he created a sizable amount of works in his lifetime. Like this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. You know what? He just created a lot of series. And all of these are going to be relevant in some way to today's game. That being Astro Boy Omega Factor. Astro Boy Omega Factor was a game created in 2003 for the GBA, developed by Hitmaker, a division of Sega, and Treasure, well known and lauded for their excellent action games like Gunstar Heroes and Radiant Silvergun. It was also created to coincide with an animated reboot of the Astro Boy series, which was in turn meant to celebrate Astro Boy's canonical birthday of 2003. Now, licensed games generally get a bad rap, but in this case it's actually one of the best games available on the Game Boy Advance system. Omega Factor is part side-scrolling beat-em-up, it's part horizontal shooter, and it's all Tezuka homage. See, normally with licensed games you see the licensed characters taken and put into a rather generic or cookie-cutter setting, but here the license is made the crux of the gameplay. Tezuka had this thing he called his star system, wherein he'd take characters from one of his works and put them into another one, and Omega Factor takes that concept and makes it a game in and of itself. This isn't just an Astro Boy game, it's also an Ambassador Magma game, it's a Three-Eyed One game, and it's a Jungle Emperor Leo game. It's basically Osamu Tezuka's entire body of work made into a single game, and it's absolutely amazing. Now, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to talk about it all in here, so I'm going to say right now, look at the forum thread. I'll be linking to it in the description, and while I'll be doing my best to squeeze as much as I can into the videos, there will be more in the thread. The game lets you choose from 3 different difficulties when starting it, the first of which is easy, and is indeed quite that. It gives you unlimited usage of your ultimate moves and makes the game a bit of a cakewalk. Normal is fairly normal if a bit on the hard side, but hard is legitimately hard and probably one of the most challenging experiences available on the GBA. It is, of course, also what I will be going for. The game also starts with a short intro, which I'm going to be cutting out for. Enjoy. Fittingly, the section of the game titled Birth depicts Astro's birth. To summarize, in the future year of 2003, a young boy named Tobio dies in a tragic car accident, at which point his father, the director of the Ministry of Science, built a robot in his image to help cope with the loss. Unfortunately, as time goes on, he slowly loses interest in the robotic Tobio, primarily due to his inhuman qualities like his lack of growth. Eventually, he either abandons Astro or sells him to a robot circus. It's around this time that the robot loses his memory, and eventually gets taken in by the man on screen right now, Professor O'Shea. He is the man appointed as the director of the Ministry of Science after Astro's father disappears. It's a fairly dark origin story, and dark themes are a recurring feature within Astro Boy stories, which often prominently feature racism, violence, and death. It's uncommon for the time periods they were published in, and part of the reason the works have remained engaging and memorable over the years. As stated previously, the game's primarily a side-scrolling beat-em-up. This means you'll have your standard horizontal movement, moving left and right, punching, kicking, and all that jazz, but because Astro's a robot with a whole bunch of special powers, you also get some more interesting mechanics, the first of which are his jet thrusters. You're able to basically boost through both the air and enemy units. Whenever you're boosting, you'll become completely invincible and be able to travel through any harmful obstacles, on top of giving you more environmental mobility, useful in places like this. You use it by simply double tapping A, left, or right, and it's very useful for getting yourself where you need to go. Now while O'Shea's talking here, I might as well get it out there that Astro Boy isn't this guy's original name. It was first created as Mighty Atom, or Tetsuwan Atomu. The name was changed on American stores way back when, and he's been known by that moniker ever since due to simple brand recognition. But it's not his initial God-given name, which was supposed to be a reference to atomic power, his energy source. Back to the game as it gives its tutorial, beating up enemies is fairly straightforward, involving repeated punches and kicks. As you do so, you're given points, added to a stage-by-stage scoreboard. Now, the game does record your high scores, but it's not at all important, and I won't really be paying any attention to it at all. To add a bit of variety, we also get a finger laser. Like his rocket legs, the finger laser is one of Astro's more iconic powers, but unlike the power of flight, which he's had since the very beginning, he only gained the finger laser in the 1980s animated show. He's had 3 animated shows, one in the 1960s, one in 1980, and one in 2003, and each time he generally gains another power or two. The finger laser pierces enemies, and while it doesn't do as much damage as a punch, it is very effective against groups. Speaking of punches, after a 3-punch combo, you'll normally perform a kick, but you can also do it immediately by pressing down and the punch button. The kick is one of the best moves in the game, and quite useful in most situations, in that you're able to kick enemies around, quite literally. You'll send them flying, and every time they come in contact with another one, they'll throw that enemy too, which means you can incapacitate every enemy on screen so long as you keep kicking them back and forth. Later in the game, some enemies are immune to it, but when they're not, it's usually quite effective. In addition to your normal powers, you also have a series of EX attacks. Now, normally in games, these would be considered ultimates and used sparingly, but here you'll actually be using them fairly often, and their energy recharges pretty quickly to allow this. On hard mode, you're only given 3 shots with them at a time, but again, they do recharge, so they're fairly spammable nonetheless. You have 3 options, the first of which is Astro's Arm Cannon. This was added in the 2003 cartoon series, which all the character designs in this game were pulled from, and it's basically an upgrade finger laser. Astro turns his entire forearm into a cannon, but unfortunately it leaves him completely vulnerable from behind, as seen here. It's the most powerful move, but also kind of defensively dangerous. The EX dash is the second and very situational, turning your air dash into a damaging move. It doesn't do a lot and is never super useful. The third attack available is the rear-mounted machine gun, which is a rather infamous power. Astro's had it since his creation, and it attacks and stuns every enemy on screen simultaneously, which is useful if a little odd-looking. It's the weakest of the 3, but probably the best room clear insofar as normal enemies go. And now O'Shea's introducing us to the titular Omega Factor, whereas older fans of Astro might recognize the term as referring to something else. In this game, it's actually just his soul, allowing him to expand his knowledge of the world around him by meeting new people. Every time you meet and understand a person, this screen will pop up and show a little sprite of them. And whenever this happens, I'll be reading off their little bios and the character list included in the game. Number 1, Dr. O'Shea. He is the director of the Science Ministry. He adopts Astro as his son. He is a constant source of support for Astro. Because of his enormous nose, he is also known as Dr. Elephant overseas. He appears as Dr. Narzenkop in Marine Express. This is also the name he uses in the manga X Point on the South Pacific. Dr. O'Shea is generally known as Ochanomizu in Japan, and he's the man who initially rescues Astro. He's a kind, intelligent, and brave man, but isn't very strong and is occasionally stubbornly naive. Still, he creates a number of gadgets and helps repair Astro as the series goes on, which makes him one of the most important characters as well as a longtime ally. Now here's another fun little function of the Omega Factor. Whenever you meet and understand a new person, your growth is represented as an upgrade. You get to choose from a number of options that the game will explain for me, but generally speaking, they're all pretty useful. Censor's probably the least so, but it really doesn't matter what order you pick, as you'll always be able to fill everything out by the end of the game. To go off on a bit of a tangent while he's speaking here, while it's a bit odd to speak about souls in the context of robots, in Astro's case it's always been a bit of a recurring theme. He's always had something to set him apart from other robots, be it spirit, independent thought, or heart, generally referred to by the Japanese kokoro. It allows the series to explore somewhat deeper themes like what it means to be a living thing, as well as setting Astro up to be an intermediary between humans and their creations. Gameplay-wise, the Omega Factor creates an incentive to search out new characters. Every time you see a new person, you get a little bit more powerful, and it also gives the developers an excuse to include such an excessive amount of them. As far as power-up selection goes, generally speaking, you want to level up your health, punching, and laser stats. Sensors are almost never needed except in specific stages, which makes them a little more accessible. Jet is useful, but only really increases how many times you can use them before you need to touch ground again. And guns are usually more for crowd control and less for damage. Also, for some of the abilities, upgrading them alters their color or their size, which is a cool visual touch. All of these powers also tie into one of Astro's core concepts, that of his 7 powers. What exactly these entail has evolved a bit over the years, but they're always a focus. A list of what they've included encompasses universal translation, strength equivalent to 100,000 horsepower, or after upgrades a full million, flight, super hearing 1,000 times what a human has, an instinctive morality checker, eye-mounted headlights, lasers in his fingers, high intelligence including the capacity for independent thought, extreme durability, rear-mounted machine guns, and a laser cannon in his arm. Here, a few of them have been pruned down, like the eye and ear upgrades being considered sensors, but they're still essentially the same as he's had in the past, just retooled a bit to make them more video gamey. It's one of many bits of admirable attention to detail in the game. Now the girl here, Watto, is our first example of a character that's introduced but not fully understood immediately. And again, I won't be going into a character until the Omega Factor actually decides it's time. However, she is going to be our first stage objective, and while the intro stage isn't all that exciting, the rest of the game I can assure you is. I'll be cutting out here, but stay tuned for the next episode wherein we go and rescue Watto in Metro City. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.